There's a burgeoning need in America for greater understanding of economics. Our collective lack of knowledge about topics such as finance, markets, public policy have resulted in an economic growth rate that is too low to meet our nation's needs. Our economy is also failing to provide equitable wealth distribution to our citizens. Our economic problems are big and complex, and if we are going to solve them in a framework of a democracy and free market capitalism, then individuals acting as citizens and consumers must make good choices. Now, I believe that democracy and free markets are the most powerful systems ever devised for meeting society's needs. But a large-scale improvement in our decision-making ability will only be achieved through a greater focus on choice-making at the secondary school level. Therefore, I propose the development of a 3-year course of study based on behavioral economics, and that this course be made a requirement for graduation for all American high school students. A rich understanding of behavioral economics will empower individuals to make better personal choices. And empowered citizens making good choices is a necessary first step in resolving our nation's most critical problems. On this slide, I have listed some of our most pressing national economic issues. This is not an exhaustive list. I just ran out of room. But I think you get the idea. There are a lot of them, and they are all quite complex. On this slide, I've listed some individual or household economic issues. You may have noticed that healthcare makes both lists. Total spending on healthcare in this country accounts for 18% of our total gross domestic product. That's over $3 trillion every year, or more than $10,000 for every woman, man, and child in our country. And these numbers are rising rapidly. The trade association representing the healthcare industry estimates that fully 70% of all of this money goes to treat conditions that are caused by lifestyle choices. Put simply, vast resources are being allocated to pay for the results of bad decisions. The point here is that healthcare and all of these other national and personal issues are not only economic in nature, they are also behavioral. And that is why I'm promoting a study of behavioral economics at the high school level. Now, behavioral economics has enjoyed a surge in popularity recently. Richard Thaler, a behavioral economics professor from the University of Chicago, was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics last year. Thaler's work is heavily influenced by the work of Daniel Kahneman and his longtime collaborator, the late Amos Tversky. Kahneman is a psychologist who never took a course in economics. Nevertheless, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002. Now, these researchers have extensively demonstrated that we consistently make decisions that are opposed to our own economic interests. And in many cases, we're making these decisions all the while believing we are being totally rational at the time. These researchers have also extensively shown that many of these bad decisions are predictable. And I argue that if they're predictable, then shouldn't we learn to be able to avoid many of them, or maybe make better account for them, or maybe just increase our sensitivity to our own shortcomings? So behavioral economics starts with the premise that humans are not rational. This is a big departure from the traditional approach to the subject of economics. You see, the cornerstone of traditional economic thought is something called rational agent theory. This is based on the premise that humans are rational, consistent over time, and mostly selfish. Rational agents are good predictors, and they use good judgment. They behave in a way that results in the best personal economic outcomes. Like Mr. Spock, the Vulcan from Star Trek, they are completely logical. Thaler refers to these theoretical agents as econs. Now, we all know that humans are afflicted with biases and blind spots, and we're bad intuitive statisticians. And unlike Mr. Spock, sometimes we behave irrationally. It's a universal fact of the human condition that many of our most important choices in life will be unduly influenced by factors that are utterly inconsequential to our situation at the moment. Let me give you a couple of examples of how all this stuff works. The first comes from Duke University. A business professor randomly assigned 2 versions of a course evaluation questionnaire to his students. Duke routinely uses these questionnaires to measure the effectiveness of its teachers. These questionnaires were short, and they were identical except for one question toward the end. Half the forms asked for the students to provide 2 ways in which the course could be improved, and it left space for 2 answers. The other half of the form asked for 10 ways the course could be improved, and it left room for 10 answers. All students were then asked to rate the course overall using a scale of 1 to 7. The students that were asked to provide 10 answers consistently rated the course higher than those who were asked to provide only 2 answers. You see, making a list of 10 improvements is mentally difficult. The subconscious effect was, since it was difficult to fill in all of the blanks, the course must be pretty good. So they rated the course higher. On the other hand, filling in 2 blanks is not that difficult. And the subconscious effect was that since it's so easy to come up with 2 answers to this question, the course must need some improvement. They rated the course lower. Now, there are 2 takeaways that are very important from this. The first is, this type of question on a short questionnaire should not have affected the overall evaluation of a student in a logical world. And the second, and I think more interesting takeaway, is that by asking for more criticisms, the professor could predictably garner a higher evaluation score. Second example comes from Thaler. Early in his teaching career, he gave a midterm to his economics class that made all of his students mad at him. He wanted to identify 3 categories of students: the stars at the top, who mastered the material, the middle group, who grasped the basic concepts, and then a third group who just didn't get it at all. He devised a test with 100 points possible that accomplished his goal. The problem with it is, the average score was only 72, and this made all of the students upset. Thaler explained he would use a generous curve when applying grades, that any score above an 80 would garner an A, any score above 65 would get a B, and any score above 50 would get a C. Nevertheless, all categories of students thought that the test was too difficult and unfair. Thaler was a young teacher at the time and worried about job security. He was motivated to avoid some of those bad course evaluations himself. So for the next exam, he devised a test that had 137 points possible. This test also achieved the goal of identifying the 3 categories of students. The average score on this test was 96. The students were delighted. Now, this test was actually harder than the first test, because 96 out of 137 is 70%. The same students who were upset about getting a 72 were quite happy about getting a 96 out of 137 the second time around. I can hear the excited phone calls to their parents now. Mom, Dad, I got a 96 on my econ exam. Now, econs would never behave this way. But college students studying economics at a good college predictably behave this way year after year. I think we can all identify with these two groups of students. Like many of us, or you, they did well in high school. They went to a good college where they were studying business and economics, so they had some exposure and experience with quantitative reasoning. Nevertheless, they exhibited biases that were subconscious, counterintuitive, and ultimately predictable. This is only a tiny sampling from the literature, but I hope you see that behavioral economics is interesting, and it's accessible, and it's even fun because we are finally studying us, ourselves, not theoretical models and agents. We should use statistical tools to augment our study. We do live in the age of big data, but behavioral economics is not based on difficult mathematics. This is the approach that's similar to that of Adam Smith, the father of capitalism. Smith was not a mathematician, but he was an astute, open-minded observer of human behavior. Now, to be fair, economists have always known deep down in their heart that humans aren't really rational. And I should say at this point that marketers, pollsters, politicians, lawyers, judges, doctors, the police, and criminals, they also know this too. They rely on predictable irrationality to ply their various trades, and not always for the cause of good. But somewhere along the line, mainstream economists became enthralled with mathematics. And while this may have made the field less crowded, it became a big barrier to entry into a field in which all of us must engage at some level. So, acknowledging that human behavior is not rational is not a revolutionary idea, but it has tremendous potential that is yet untapped to educate our citizens, especially when they are in those precious years of early adulthood. You see, we may be irrational, but we are teachable. Presently, economics is typically offered as a one-year elective in high school, if it is offered at all. The most rigorous courses, such as the AP Economics class offered here at Deerfield, will resemble the first-year introductory college course. The textbook used in these classes typically resembles the classic tome Economics, written by the venerable economist Paul Samuelson. This textbook was first published in 1948, and it stayed in print for over 50 years. It is by far the largest selling textbook ever written in any subject. Samuelson was the first American to win the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1970. The New York Times referred to him as the foremost academic economist of the 20th century. Clearly, he left his mark. But this is no longer the 20th century, and the mathematics-intensive principles espoused by Samuelson and the other giants in the field, which I toiled as a student, may have gotten us to where we are today, but they are ill-equipped to propel us forward. I've studied economics for over 40 years, and I believe that now is the time to redefine its foundational principles. This will give us the opportunity to redefine our national educational objectives in a way that immediately and profoundly affects and benefits individuals in society. Right now, as you know, high school students are required to take English almost every year that they're in high school. They're also required to take history and math and science. All of these are important courses. I am a fervent advocate of a liberal arts education. But if we look closely at ourselves and our culture, no subject is more relevant at this time than an enlightened approach to economics. And we can't afford to wait for our citizens to study it in college, because many of them never get to college. But the rights and responsibilities of citizenship are conferred upon us all. Therefore, we must make economic literacy at the high school level a top national priority. This makes this a big idea, but it will be less costly and vastly more effective in the long run than maintaining the status quo or trying to devise policies and regulations that mandate the way we behave. If you've heard of the recent initiatives to promote STEM-based courses, you know that the efforts to redefine high school education are already underway. There's also an initiative in my home state of Kansas that promotes vocational training and decreases the requirements for subjects such as the humanities. The stated objective of these initiatives is to train citizens to become marketable suppliers of labor to the economy of the future, to close the skills gap, in other words, and to do so without necessitating the cost of a college degree. Closing the skills gap merits consideration, but I argue that none of our most imminent threats to our national well-being can be resolved by a greater understanding of engineering and technology if we cannot first learn to make good choices. I've heard many times the objective of a liberal arts education stated as helping students learn how to think. This is a really good description. I'll stick with that. But our standards for thinking constantly need to be updated and revised and redefined. Behavioral economics offers us the opportunity to do just that. I invite you to join me in making this choice. Thank you.